I kept my daughter a secret from her billionaire father until she applied for a scholarship using his name. In a glass-walled conference room, overlooking Manhattan's skyline, a billionaire leaned forward and asked me the one question I'd been dreading for 11 years. Would this conversation change my entire life? His voice carried that particular weight of someone who already sensed the answer. I glanced at my 11-year-old daughter sitting beside me, her hands folded precisely, the way she did when nervous, and I said the only word I could manage, yes. What he didn't know, what I was seconds away from revealing, was that the brilliant young girl who'd just won his foundation's most prestigious scholarship was his daughter. What would you do if a single name on a birth certificate could rewrite your entire family story and expose everything you'd spent years protecting? Would you keep silent to shield your child from potential rejection, or would you risk everything for the truth? That's the question I faced every single day for over a decade, until one scholarship application forced my hand and shattered the lock I'd placed on our secret. I kept my daughter Raven's father a secret for 11 years. Not out of spite, not from anger, but from a complicated mixture of fear and fierce maternal protection. When you're 22 and pregnant, working 3 jobs to finish college, and the father is someone whose name appears in Forbes magazine, you make choices that seem right at the moment. You tell yourself that absence is better than conditional love, that struggle with dignity beats comfort with strings attached. You convince yourself that protecting your child from the possibility of being seen as a financial obligation rather than a beloved daughter is the highest form of love. But secrets have a way of demanding their own timeline. They don't care about your carefully constructed life or the walls you've built to protect your child's heart. Sometimes they announce themselves through something as innocent as a scholarship application, through a daughter's determination to excel, through a twist of fate that brings 3 lives crashing together in ways no one could have predicted. Stay with me until the end of this story, because the way our daughter chose to reveal the truth will fundamentally change how you think about courage, forgiveness, and the extraordinary wisdom that children possess when adults underestimate them. Before I continue, I want to take a moment to thank each of you incredible viewers who've helped Mr. Steele Rich Stories cross 600 subscribers. Your support, your comments, your willingness to engage with these complex human stories means more than you know. If you believe in the power of truth, in second chances, and in the kind of love that transcends years of silence, please hit that like button right now and subscribe to join our growing family of storytellers. Ring that notification bell too, because you won't want to miss how this story concludes. Trust me, the ending will leave you reconsidering everything you thought you knew about family secrets. But let me back up, because to understand how we ended up in that conference room, you need to understand how it all began. The scholarship. That became a catalyst, the application that became a confession, and the truth that had been waiting 11 years for its moment. The conference room where our lives collided wasn't supposed to be the setting for this revelation. It was meant to be a simple scholarship presentation, a proud moment for Raven, who'd written an essay about resilience that had apparently moved the entire selection committee to tears. The Blackwell Foundation, yes, Damon Blackwell's foundation, awarded only 5 scholarships annually to exceptional young students showing extraordinary promise despite challenging circumstances. Raven had won not just any scholarship, but the grand prize, full tuition through graduate school, mentorship, and opportunities that would transform her future. When the foundation requested a parent meeting before the public announcement, I thought it was standard protocol. Rich philanthropists probably wanted to ensure their money was going to stable families, supportive environments. I prepared myself to discuss Raven's academic achievements, her leadership in the robotics club, her volunteer work at the literacy center. I rehearsed answers about our modest 2-bedroom apartment, my job as a software developer, our quiet life in Brooklyn. What I didn't prepare for was walking into that room and finding Damon Blackwell himself waiting for us. The shock of seeing him hit me in waves. You notice absurd details while missing obvious ones in moments like these. I catalogued the silver threading through his temples that hadn't been there. 12 years ago, the fact that his assistant had arranged 3 chairs, on our side of the table instead of 2, the way the afternoon sun caught the glass behind him and created a halo effect that seemed almost mocking. My mind registered these details while simultaneously screaming warnings, calculating escape routes, measuring the distance between Raven and the door. "Miss Graves," Damon stood when we entered, extending his hand with the practiced ease of someone who'd perfected the art of making others comfortable. "And you must be Raven. Your essay was extraordinary." My daughter, our daughter, shook his hand with confidence that belied her age. She had his eyes, that particular shade of green that shifted with the light. She had his way of tilting her head when thinking, his tendency to tap his index finger against his thumb when processing information. How had I convinced myself for so long that strangers wouldn't notice these similarities? How had I believed that keeping them apart would somehow prevent this moment from arriving? "Thank you, Mr. Blackwell," Raven responded, her voice clear and steady. "Your foundation's work in education reform inspired my entire thesis about accessibility and opportunity." He smiled, that same smile that had undone me at 22, and gestured for us to sit. "Please call me Damon. We're going to be working together for many years after all." The promise in those words made my chest tight. Many years. Future tense. Plans were already forming in his mind about this brilliant young girl who'd captured his foundation's attention. If only he knew he was already 11 years late to her life. 11 years of first words and lost teeth, of soccer games and science fairs, of nightmares soothed and dreams encouraged. "Before we discuss the scholarship specifics," Damon said, settling into his chair, with an ease I envied, "I like to know the families we're partnering with. Raven's application mentioned she was raised by a single mother. That must have been challenging, Miss Graves." There it was, the opening I'd both dreaded and somehow expected. The universe has a twisted sense of timing, doesn't it? All those years of careful avoidance, of taking jobs that would never intersect with his world, of living in neighborhoods where hedge fund billionaires never ventured, and here we were because my daughter inherited not just his intellect, but his exceptional drive. "We managed," I replied, my voice steadier than my hands, which I kept folded in my lap. "Raven has always been remarkably determined. Like her mother, clearly," Damon observed, reviewing the file in front of him. "Columbia University, graduated summa cum laude, while raising a child alone. That's impressive." Raven's application mentioned her father wasn't involved. "May I ask?" He paused, his professionalism warring with what seemed like genuine curiosity. "Was that his choice or yours?" The room suddenly felt airless. Raven shifted beside me, and I caught her subtle glance. She knew something was happening here beyond a normal scholarship interview. My daughter had always been too perceptive for her own good, too quick to read the currents of adult emotion that we tried to hide from children. "It's complicated," I said, which was both the truth and a desperate deflection. "Most important things are," Damon replied, and for just a moment his professional mask slipped. I saw a flash of something I remembered, that depth of feeling he usually kept, carefully controlled, that intensity that had drawn me to him during that library fundraiser 12 years ago when I was young and convinced that love could overcome fundamental differences in power, position, and possibility. "Before you judge me for what comes next, before you decide whether I was wrong to keep this secret or wrong to finally reveal it, let me take you back to the beginning, not to excuse my choices but to explain them. Because understanding why someone makes a decision doesn't mean agreeing with it, but it does mean recognizing the human heart's complicated mathematics when calculating risk versus love, protection versus truth, fear versus hope. But right now, in this conference room, with Damon asking questions that were leading us inevitably toward revelation, I could feel the carefully constructed walls I'd built starting to crack. Raven sat beside me, her posture perfect, her expression calm, but I knew her well enough to see the tension in her shoulders, the way her breathing had changed to something more deliberate. Damon pulled out a second folder, and my heart stuttered. "However, there's something unusual about your application that I need to address," he said, his tone shifting from conversational to something more serious. When we process scholarship applications, we run standard background checks, not invasive, just verification of the information provided. And something came up that I wanted to discuss directly with you both. He opened the folder, and I could see it contained more than just Raven's essay and transcripts. There were other documents, printouts, and what looked like official records. In the section where you listed your father, Damon continued, his eyes on Raven now. You wrote, Damon Blackwell. Our verification team initially flagged this as a possible error, or perhaps even fraud, someone trying to claim connection to me for advantage. But then they looked deeper. My breath stopped entirely. Raven's hand found mine under the table. Birth records are public in New York, Damon said, his voice oddly flat, emotionless, in a way that suggested he was working very hard to maintain control. And 11 years ago a birth certificate was filed for Raven Elizabeth Graves, mother Amani Graves, father listed as unknown. He looked up at me then, and I saw the moment comprehension truly dawned. Not suspicion, not calculation, but the sudden devastating understanding of what he'd missed. But you put my name on the scholarship application, he said to Raven, his voice barely above a whisper. Why would you do that if the birth certificate says unknown? Raven, my brave, brilliant daughter, looked him directly in the eye and said, because unknown isn't the same as untrue. My mom left that line blank when I was born because she thought it was safer that way. But I'm 11 now, and I'm tired of blank spaces where truth should be. So when the application asked for my father's name, I put yours. Because it's the truth. The silence that followed was absolute. Damon's face cycled through shock, confusion, and something that looked like grief mixed with wonder. His hands gripped the edge of the table, knuckles whitening. Amani, he said, and my name in his voice carried the weight of 12 years. Of absence, of questions never asked, of a child he'd never known existed. Is Raven? Yes, I said, the word scraping past 11 years of silence. She's your daughter. The second folder lay between us like evidence of a life he'd never known existed. But before I tell you what happened in the minutes after that revelation, before I explain how Damon reacted to discovering he had an 11-year-old daughter, you need to understand the world I'd built without him, and the world we'd once shared when everything seemed possible. 11 years ago, I was Amani Graves, Community Development Coordinator for the Brooklyn Public Library system, and my entire life revolved around making knowledge accessible to kids who needed it most. My days were filled with grant applications, after-school programs, and battles with city council members who thought libraries were luxuries rather than lifelines. My tiny apartment was walking distance from 3 different branches, and I knew every librarian, every regular patron, every kid who came in for free Wi-Fi and stayed for the stories. My world was small by choice, meaningful by design. I measured success not in stock portfolios, but in the number of kids who signed up for summer reading programs, in the tears of joy when we helped someone get their GED, in the quiet triumph of keeping branches open despite budget cuts. This was the life I'd chosen, after watching my own mother work multiple jobs just to keep the lights on, after seeing how the pursuit of money could distort every relationship it touched. The night I met Damon Blackwell, I wasn't supposed to be at the Manhattan Library's annual fundraising gala. My supervisor had gotten sick, and someone needed to represent Brooklyn's interests to potential donors. I'd borrowed a dress from my roommate, practiced my pitch on the subway, and promised myself I'd stay just long enough to make connections for our summer literacy program. The main branch transformed into something from a dream that night. Candlelight reflected off marble surfaces, and conversations echoed through halls that usually heard only whispers and turning pages. I felt like an outsider among the city's philanthropic elite, clutching my water while trying to memorize faces I'd only seen in newspapers. "You look like you're cataloging everyone in the room," a voice said beside me. I turned to find a man whose face I recognized from the business section. Damon Blackwell, 31 years old, youngest, partner in his family's investment firm's history, known for turning a modest company into a billion-dollar empire. But what struck me wasn't his tailored tuxedo or the way other guests seemed to orbit around him. It was how genuinely tired he looked underneath the polish, how his smile seemed practiced rather than real. Occupational hazard, I replied, surprising myself with my calm. Librarians are professionally trained to organize things, even people. And how would you organize me? He seemed genuinely curious, not flirtatious. There was something vulnerable in the question, as if he actually wanted to know how someone saw him beyond the Forbes headlines. None to fiction, I said after a moment. Business and economics, obviously, but you keep looking at the rare books displayed like you want to touch them, so maybe history too. And you've checked your phone 12 times in the last 5 minutes but haven't answered it once, which suggests you're here out of obligation, not interest. His laugh was unexpected, rich and genuine, nothing like the calculated responses I'd heard him give to other guests. You missed one thing. What's that? I'm actually here because I love libraries. They were my escape growing up. Before the money, before all of this, he gestured vaguely at the opulence around us. Libraries were where I felt safe. That admission shifted something between us. Suddenly, he wasn't Damon Blackwell, billionaire. He was just someone who understood that libraries were sanctuaries, that books could save you when nothing else could. We talked for 3 hours that night, not about tax to deductible donations or naming opportunities, but about real things. He asked about my work in Brooklyn, listened with genuine interest as I explained, how we were trying to bridge the digital divide, how our branches served as community centers, resource hubs, and safe havens all at once. He told me about growing up before his father's first patent changed everything, about how he still visited his childhood library branch every year to donate anonymously. When the gala ended, he walked me outside where the city hummed with late night energy. The air smelled like rain and spring blossoms. I have a confession, he said, pulling out a cocktail napkin covered in notes. I've been writing down everything you said about your programs. Would it be completely inappropriate if I asked to see them myself? Not as a donor. Well, not just as a donor, but because I think you're doing something important that everyone else is missing. 2 weeks later, he showed up at our branch wearing jeans and a university sweatshirt, looking nothing like the man from the gala. He spent 6 hours there, reading to kindergartners, helping teenagers with college, essays, listening to seniors share stories about the neighborhood's history. When one of our regular kids mentioned he'd been teaching himself coding from library books because his school didn't offer computer science, Damon sat on the floor with him for an hour, helping debug programs on a laptop held together with tape. This is real, he said to me afterward, standing outside as the sun set over Brooklyn. What you do here, this is the real work. Not what I do, moving numbers around, making wealthy people wealthier. This matters. Our first real date wasn't fancy. He brought takeout to my apartment because I had to finish a grant proposal. We sat on my fire escape, sharing noodles while I explained the process of securing city funding. He listened like I was revealing secrets, asked questions that showed he understood both the bureaucracy and the mission behind it. When I apologized for the unglamorous evening, he said, "Amani, this is the most honest night I've had in years." The relationship that followed was quiet, earnest, and achingly tender. Damon would show up at different library branches with coffee and pastries for the staff. He'd text me photos of interesting books he found during his travels. We had a standing Thursday night tradition at a small restaurant in Sunset Park where nobody recognized him and we could talk for hours about everything except his business. He taught me about Renaissance art, which he'd studied before his MBA. I introduced him to contemporary poetry and the underground jazz clubs scattered throughout Brooklyn. We spent entire Saturdays at museums, making up stories about the people in paintings. He laughed at my terrible jokes, and I called him out when he tried to use business jargon to avoid talking about feelings. The night he told me he loved me, we were sitting on the stone steps of the Prospect Park boathouse at midnight, sharing cinnamon tea from a thermos I'd brought. There were no grand gestures, no expensive jewelry, just his voice, quiet and certain. I've built this entire empire, Amani, but sitting here with you, talking about library programs and community gardens, this is the only time I feel like myself. I believed him. That was my first mistake. Not because he was lying, but because I didn't understand yet how a person could be completely sincere and still be unable to choose love over the empire they'd built. As autumn turned to winter, Blackwell Industries began a massive expansion. What had been occasional late nights became constant. Our Thursday dinners got cancelled more often than they happened. He'd fall asleep during our phone calls, exhausted from 18-hour days. The man who'd sat on library floors teaching kids to code was being consumed by the CEO everyone expected him to be. "It's temporary," he promised during one of our increasingly rare moments together. "Once this merger goes through, things will calm down." But I was already seeing the pattern. After the merger came the IPO preparation. After that, the international expansion. The empire he'd built didn't have an off switch, and everyone around him, lawyers, board members, his own family, had a vested interest in keeping it running at maximum capacity. I discovered I was pregnant on a Thursday in March, in the bathroom of the library branch, where I'd been fighting nausea I'd attributed to stress. The 2 pink lines appeared like a verdict I wasn't ready for. I sat on the floor of that tiny bathroom, surrounded by motivational posters about reading, and tried to reconcile the life growing inside me with the reality of who its father was becoming. My first instinct was to call Damon immediately. I even dialed his number, but it went straight to voicemail with his assistant's voice explaining he was traveling for business. He hadn't even told me he was leaving the country. That night, I did what any rational woman would do. I researched everything about Damon Blackwell that I'd previously avoided knowing. The deeper I dug, the more terrified I became. There were 2 paternity suits from years before we'd met, both dismissed with sealed settlements. His family's lawyers had a reputation for protecting the Blackwell name at any cost. There were non-disclosure agreements, sealed court records, and whispered stories in business, forums about people who'd threatened the empire and disappeared from public life. I found an interview from just 6 months before we met where Damon said, "Family is something I'll consider when the company is stable. Right now, I can't afford distractions from building something lasting." Another article quoted him saying children were wonderful in theory, but incompatible with the kind of focus required to build a successful enterprise. But what really broke my heart was finding photos from his business trips. Damon at conferences surrounded by executives, looking exactly like the corporate machine he'd said he never wanted to become. The man who'd brought takeout to my fire escape was disappearing, replaced by someone who lived in boardrooms and spoke in quarterly projections. Fear has a reasonable voice when you're 22 and pregnant. It doesn't shout or panic, it whispers logic. It reminded me that I had student loans and worked in a non-profit. It pointed out that Damon's family would see me as someone after his money, my child as a financial liability. It suggested that a man who couldn't make time for Thursday dinner wouldn't make time for midnight feedings. It asked whether I wanted my child to be a line item in someone's net worth calculation, a weekend obligation squeezed between board meetings. The reasonable voice won. I didn't disappear completely. That would have raised questions. Instead, I performed a careful fade. Responses to texts became shorter. I was suddenly busy during his available windows. When he asked if something was wrong, I said work was overwhelming, which wasn't entirely false. Managing early pregnancy while running youth programs was exhausting. Our last conversation happened in April, standing outside the same Prospect Park boathouse where he'd said he loved me. He looked exhausted, thinner, with shadows under his eyes that no amount of success could hide. "I feel like I'm losing you," he said, and the pain in his voice almost broke my resolve. "You're losing yourself," I replied, which was both deflection and truth. "When's the last time you read a book for pleasure? When did you last visit that library you grew up with?" He didn't have an answer. We stood there in the spring evening, magnolia blossoms falling around us like snow, and I think we both knew it was ending. What he didn't know was that I was already 8 weeks pregnant, already planning my disappearance from our overlapping worlds. After this quarter, he started, but I stopped him. "There's always going to be another quarter, Damon, another merger, another expansion. And that's okay, that's who you are." but I can't wait in the margins of your life anymore." He left for an international trip the next morning. I blocked his number while sitting in an obstetrician's waiting room, my hand protective over my still flat stomach. Building a life without him was both easier and harder than expected. Easier because Brooklyn wrapped around us like a protective embrace. My community of librarians, teachers and neighbors became Raven's village. My mother moved from her home to help, never once questioning my decision to raise her granddaughter alone. We created our own traditions: Saturday morning pancakes, sunset walks. In Prospect Park, bedtime stories that sometimes lasted hours. Harder because Raven was extraordinary from the start, and every milestone made me wonder what Damon would think. Her first word was book. Of course it was. She taught herself to read at 3, built elaborate structures at 4, and started asking about genetics at 5. When she was 7, she asked why she was so good at math when I struggled with basic calculations. And I told her that gifts sometimes skip generations, come from distant branches of family trees. I named her Raven because they're brilliant birds, capable of solving complex problems, of using tools, of remembering faces for years. Also because they thrive in cities, making homes in unlikely places, finding sustenance where others see scarcity. It felt like a name that would give her strength, that would remind her she could soar even without traditional foundations. The promise to tell her at 11 came from my mother, who believed children deserved truth at an age when they could begin to process complexity. 11 is old enough to understand nuance, she said, but young enough to forgive. I marked it on calendars in my mind, this future date when I would sit Raven down and explain everything. I practiced speeches during late-night feedings, refined them during playground supervisions, revised them as she grew more brilliant and perceptive each year. I told myself I was waiting for her sake, but maybe I was just waiting for courage I didn't yet possess. Would you have told him then, when you were young and scared, when his world seemed designed to consume anything soft and real? Or would you have protected your child until you felt the world was safe enough for complicated truths? Comment below what your heart would have done, because 11 years later, sitting in that conference room with truth finally spoken aloud, I still wasn't sure I'd made the right choice. 3 months before that conference room meeting changed everything, Raven and I were having our regular Tuesday afternoon at the Fort Greene Library, the same branch where I'd discovered my pregnancy 11 years earlier. She'd claimed her favorite corner table, the one near the window where afternoon light made homework seem less tedious. Her workspace was classic Raven, color-coded folders arranged by subject, a notebook filled with equations and doodles, her lucky purple hair ribbon keeping her braids back, and a container of apple slices I'd packed that morning. At 11, Raven was the kind of child who wrote code during lunch breaks and illustrated her science notes with perfectly proportioned diagrams. She carried herself with quiet confidence that came from knowing exactly who she was, even if she didn't know the whole story of where she came from. Other kids sometimes found her intensity off-putting, but Raven didn't seem to mind. "I'd rather have 3 real friends than 30 fake ones," she'd told me once. Wisdom that stung, because I wondered if she'd inherited that particular selective approach from her father. I was processing returned books when Margaret, our head librarian, handed me a stack of flyers. New scholarship opportunity. Mind putting these on the community board? The moment I saw the Blackwell Foundation logo, my chest tightened. For 11 years, I'd successfully avoided Damon's expanding influence. But lately, his foundation's reach had grown impossible to ignore. They funded STEM programs, built computer labs, sponsored coding camps, all the things I'd once dreamed we'd support together. Now he was doing it alone, or rather, with the army of program officers and grant managers who'd replaced our Thursday night conversations about changing the world. The scholarship was substantial, full tuition through graduate school, summer enrichment programs, mentorship, and guaranteed internships. Open to students ages 10 to 14 who demonstrated exceptional promise despite challenging circumstances. The tagline read, "Brilliant minds aren't limited by zip codes." I could have thrown the flyers away. Should have, probably. But that would have meant denying opportunities to kids who deserve them, just because I was protecting my own secret. So I pinned one to the board, telling myself Raven would never notice it among the dozens of other announcements. I underestimated my daughter's systematic approach to opportunity. "Mom, look at this." Raven appeared at my desk 20 minutes later, flyer in hand, eyes bright with possibility. "The Blackwell Scholarship. It's perfect for my urban infrastructure project." My hands stilled on the keyboard. "That's a national competition, sweetheart. Thousands of kids will apply." "So," she tilted her head in that particular way when confronting a challenge. "You always say the only guaranteed failure is not trying." I watched her read through the requirements, her finger tracking each line, her mind already calculating how to craft the perfect application. The essay prompt was about identifying a systemic problem in your community and proposing an innovative solution. Raven had been documenting broken streetlights in our neighborhood for 2 years, creating maps that showed correlations between darkness and safety concerns, developing an app concept that would crowdsource reports and bundle repairs for efficiency. "I want to apply," she said, looking up at me with determination that was entirely her own. "It's a lot of work," I tried weakly. "Your science fair project is due the same week." "I can manage both." "Mom, this scholarship, it would change everything. I could go to any college, study biomedical engineering without you worrying about loans. We could finally fix the heating in our apartment instead of you saving every penny for my education." There it was, the practical idealism that made Raven extraordinary. She dreamed big, but grounded those dreams in real-world implications. She knew I'd been saving since before she was born, that every extra shift, every freelance project went into her college fund. She'd never complained about what we couldn't afford, but she noticed everything. "If you really want to apply," I said, my voice carefully neutral, "we'll make it happen." She hugged me then, quick and fierce, before returning to her table to start outlining her essay. I watched her work, noting how she approached the prompt like a puzzle to solve rather than a question to answer. She filled 3 pages with notes before writing a single sentence of the actual essay, mapping connections between inadequate street lighting, community safety, public health, and educational outcomes. For 2 weeks, Raven refined her essay with the focus of someone 3 times her age. She interviewed neighbors about how broken streetlights affected their lives, gathered data from the city's open records portal, created visualizations that made abstract problems concrete. She wrote about how darkness wasn't just the absence of light, but the presence of danger, how fixing streetlights was really about illuminating possibility. Her closing paragraph made me cry. "Cities fail not in dramatic collapses, but in small abandonments. A broken light here, a closed library there, a cancelled after-school program somewhere else. But if we can bundle solutions the way darkness bundles problems, we can create networks of light that no single failure can break." The application was complete except for one section, family information. We sat at our kitchen table, laptop between us, the cursor blinking in the farther field. Raven had filled in everything else independently, but here she paused. "Should I put 'not applicable'?" she asked, her voice carefully casual in the way it got when discussing difficult topics. "You could put 'not listed'," I offered, my heart hammering. "Lots of kids do." She was quiet for a long moment, staring at that empty field. Then, without looking at me, she said, "I found an old photo." The words landed like stones in still water, ripples spreading through everything I thought I'd successfully hidden. "What photo?" Though somehow, I already knew. "From when you were in college. It fell out of that poetry book you never read anymore, the Rumi collection. You're at some fancy event, wearing a dress I've never seen, and there's a man next to you. You're both laughing at something off camera. You look different, happy in a way that's hard to describe." My throat closed around words I wasn't ready to say. "I searched the image," Raven continued, still not meeting my eyes. "Reverse image search is pretty accurate now. Damon Blackwell, CEO of Blackwell Industries, the same Blackwell whose foundation runs this scholarship." She finally looked up, and her expression held no accusation, only curiosity tinged with hurt. "Is he my father?" 11 years of carefully constructed half-truths crumbled in that moment. I could have lied, could have invented another story, but looking at my daughter, brilliant, brave, asking for truth with such dignity, I couldn't add another layer to the deception. "Yes," I whispered. Raven nodded slowly, processing this confirmation of what she'd already suspected. "Does he know about me?" "No." "Why? How do you explain adult fears to a child who sees the world in solvable problems? How do you justify choices made in panic to someone who approaches life with such deliberate thought?" "I was young and scared," I said, reaching for her hand. She let me take it, though her fingers remained loose in mine. His world was so different from ours. There were lawyers and business pressures, and people whose job was to protect his interests. I thought protecting you from that was more important than giving. You a father who might see you as an obligation rather than a gift. But you don't know that's how he would have seen me, Raven said, her voice steady but sad. You decided for both of us. The truth of that statement cut deep. You're right, I did, and maybe that was wrong, but I truly believed I was protecting you. From what? From having resources? From having two parents? From being a headline? From custody battles fought by expensive lawyers? From growing up in a world where your worth would be measured in dollar signs rather than dreams? I squeezed her hand gently, but mostly from the possibility that he might choose his company over you, the way he chose it over me. Raven was quiet for a moment, then asked, "Did you love him?" "Very much." "Did he love you?" "I think so, in his way. But sometimes love isn't enough when you're living in different worlds." She extracted her hand from mine and returned to the laptop. "I'm going to put his name, Raven, not to hurt you," she said quickly. "Not for money or revenge or whatever adults worry about, but because it's true. And maybe it's like mailing a letter to the right address, even if you're not sure of anyone's home. At least it's honest. If you put his name, they might contact him. This could change everything." "Everything already changed the moment I found that photo," she said with wisdom that shouldn't exist in someone her age. "The question is whether we let truth or fear write what happens next." I watched my 11-year-old daughter type her father's name into that field with steady hands. Such a small action, 14 letters and a space, that would demolish the careful boundaries I'd maintained for over a decade. "Are you angry with me?" I asked. Raven looked at me then with understanding beyond her years. "I'm sad that you felt so alone you couldn't tell him. I'm sad that I've spent 11 years not knowing half of where I come from. But I'm not angry. You're the best mom anyone could have. You made a choice based on fear instead of hope. And now, I'm making a different one." She moved the cursor to the submit button, her finger hovering over the trackpad. Together, I understood what she was asking, not just permission, but partnership in this moment that would change all our lives. I placed my hand over hers on the laptop. Together, I confirmed. We clicked submit. The confirmation email came immediately. "Thank you for your application to the Blackwell Foundation Excellence Scholarship. We will review your submission and contact you within 4 to 6 weeks regarding finalist status." We sat in silence, the laptop screen glowing between us. Finally, Raven asked, "What do you think will happen?" "I don't know, sweetheart. But whatever comes next, we'll face it together." She nodded, then surprised me by coming around the table to curl into my lap the way she had when she was small. "Mom, if they accept my application, if I have to meet him, will you come with me?" "Every step," I promised, holding her close. "Even if my legs shake the entire time." "They will," she said with certainty. "But you'll walk anyway. You always do the right thing, even when you're scared. That's what makes you brave." The weeks that followed passed in a strange limbo. Life continued its normal rhythm. School, work, library visits, homework, weekend, pancakes. But underneath everything ran a current of anticipation and dread. Every time my phone rang, my heart jumped. Every email notification made me hold my breath. Raven seemed calmer than I felt, returning to her normal routine with the compartmentalization, skills of someone who'd already made peace with her decision. She finished her science fair project, a water filtration system that won second place at the regional competition. She continued mapping streetlights, updating her data, refining her app prototype. She lived her life while waiting for the response that might reshape it. I was less successful at maintaining equilibrium. I found myself researching Damon obsessively, something I'd avoided for 11 years. His company had grown even larger. He'd been featured in 3 different business magazines that month alone. There were photos of him at charity galas, corporate events, and foundation ceremonies. In all of them, he wore the same professional smile I remembered, the one that didn't quite reach his eyes. He wasn't married. I confirmed that through multiple sources, relieved that. At least I wouldn't be disrupting another relationship with our revelation. There were occasional mentions of dates with various socialites, but nothing that seemed serious or lasting. His entire life appeared to revolve around Blackwell Industries and the foundation he'd established 5 years ago. The foundation. I read every article about it, watched every interview where he discussed its mission. He talked about accessibility, about brilliant minds trapped by circumstance, about his belief that potential was equally distributed, but opportunity wasn't. He sounded like the man I'd fallen in love with, the one who'd sat on library floors and dreamed about changing the world. Maybe he hadn't disappeared entirely. Maybe he'd just found a different way to do the work. 4 weeks and 2 days after Raven submitted her application, the email came. I was at work when my phone buzzed with the notification. Raven was still at school. The subject line read, Blackwell Foundation Excellence Scholarship. Finalist notification. My hands shook as I opened it. Dear Raven Graves, congratulations on being selected as a finalist for the Blackwell Foundation Excellence Scholarship. Your essay on urban infrastructure and community safety demonstrated exceptional analytical thinking and innovative problem-solving. However, there is an administrative matter regarding your application that requires clarification before we can proceed with final evaluation. Please arrange to visit our Manhattan office at your earliest convenience, accompanied by a parent or legal guardian. Our program coordinator will contact you directly to schedule this meeting. Again, congratulations on this achievement. Sincerely, the Blackwell Foundation Selection Committee. An administrative matter requiring clarification. They knew. They'd seen the name in the farther field and were asking questions. I forwarded the email to my phone and called Raven's school, asking them to let her know I'd be picking her up directly after classes ended. Then I sat at my desk, staring at the email, trying to prepare myself for the conversation that was now inevitable. When I picked up Raven, she took one look at my face and knew. They responded, "You're a finalist. But they want to meet with us. They said there's an administrative matter that needs clarification. They found out about the name, probably." We walked to the subway in silence, both processing what this meant. On the train home, Raven finally spoke. "Are you scared?" "Terrified," I admitted. "Me too. But also," she paused, searching for words, "also kind of relieved? Like, we've been waiting for this moment for 11 years, even though I didn't know that's what we were waiting for. At least now it's happening." The not knowing was harder than whatever comes next. That evening, the promised call came. A woman's voice, professional and courteous, offering several meeting times over the next week. I chose the soonest one. Waiting would only make the anxiety worse. "We'll see you Monday at 2 o'clock, the woman confirmed. "Mr. Blackwell will be conducting the meeting personally, as he does with all finalist families." My heart stopped. "Mr. Blackwell himself?" "Yes, he makes it a point to meet every finalist. He says it keeps him connected to the Foundation's mission." So he would be there. Damon would be in that room when we arrived. Whatever questions they had about the application, whatever clarification they needed, he would hear it directly. The weekend before the meeting passed in a blur of nervous preparation. I helped Raven practice potential questions, though we both knew the real questions would have nothing to do with her essay. I ironed her favorite purple dress 3 times, anxiety manifesting in obsessive perfection. I barely slept, playing out scenarios in my mind: anger, rejection, legal threats, or worse, complete indifference. Sunday night, Raven found me on the fire escape where I often went to think. She sat beside me without speaking, just her presence offering comfort. "Whatever happens tomorrow," she said finally, "we're going to be okay. We were okay before knowing, and we'll be okay after. The truth doesn't change who we are, just what others know about us." "When did you get so wise?" I asked, putting my arm around her. "I had a good teacher." She leaned against my shoulder. "Mom? Thank you for letting me do this, for not making me keep the secret just because it's scary to tell the truth." "Thank you for being brave enough to speak about it," I replied. "I should have done this years ago. Maybe, or maybe this is exactly the right time. Maybe we both needed to be ready." Monday arrived too quickly and not quickly enough. We dressed carefully, Raven in her purple dress, me in something professional that felt like armor. We took the subway into Manhattan, neither of us speaking much, both lost in our own thoughts about what waited on the 52nd floor of that glass tower. Standing outside the Blackwell Foundation building, all steel and windows reaching toward the sky, I remembered another moment 11 years earlier when I'd stood outside a clinic, making a choice that would define all our lives. This time, though, I wasn't alone. Raven squeezed my hand, and together we walked through doors that would finally force the past and present to meet. The receptionist smiled at us with practiced warmth. "Ms. Graves and Raven, Mr. Blackwell is expecting you. Please, follow me." My heart hammered as we walked through corridors lined with photos of scholarship, recipients, success stories, and lives changed by the Foundation's support. Would Raven's photo join them someday? Or would what we were about to reveal disqualify her from consideration entirely? The receptionist stopped at a conference room door. "Right through here. Can I get you anything? Water? Coffee?" "We're fine, thank you," I managed. She opened the door. And there he was. Damon Blackwell, 12 years older but still magnetic, standing by those glass walls overlooking Manhattan. He turned when we entered, professional smile in place, and then he saw Raven. I really saw her, and I watched his expression shift from polite welcome to confusion to something like recognition, even though recognition should have been impossible. "Ms. Graves," he said, his voice steady but his eyes never leaving Raven. "And this must be Raven. Please come in. Sit down." We settled into the chairs arranged on our side of the table. Damon sat across from us, that second folder already open in front of him, the one that would change everything. "Your essay was extraordinary, Raven," he began, but his tone suggested this wasn't really about the essay anymore. "But as I mentioned in the email, there's a discrepancy we need to address." Here it was. The moment 11 years of silence had been building toward. "In your application," Damon continued, his voice carefully controlled, "you listed your father as Damon Blackwell. That's me. But according to your birth certificate, which we verified as part of our standard background check, your father is listed as unknown." He looked up, and his eyes met mine for the first time since we'd entered. I saw the question there, the beginning of understanding, the hope and fear warring in his expression. "So, I need to ask directly," he said, and his voice cracked slightly on the words. "Raven, why did you put my name on your application? And Amani," he turned to me fully now, "is there something I need to know?" Raven sat up straighter, that determined tilt to her chin that was pure Damon, even if he couldn't see it yet. "I put your name because it's the truth," she said clearly. "You're my father. You just didn't know it until now." The silence that followed felt like the world holding its breath. And then, quietly, with tears already forming in his eyes, Damon whispered, "Tell me everything." "Would you like me to stay, Mr. Blackwell?" His assistant hovered by the door, clearly sensing the shift in atmospheric pressure. The air in the room had changed from professional courtesy to something far more weighted. "No, Patricia, thank you, and please hold all my calls." His voice remained professional, but I heard the tremor underneath, the careful control of someone whose world had just tilted off its axis. The door closed with a soft click that sounded deafening in the silence that followed. We sat there, 3 points of a triangle that had existed incomplete for 11 years, and I watched Damon's face cycle through disbelief, calculation, and something that looked devastatingly like grief. He opened his mouth twice before words came. When? Such a small question containing multitudes. When did I know? When was she born? When did I decide to keep this from him? I found out I was pregnant in March, 12 years ago, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. 3 months after we ended things. You were traveling. You'd been traveling constantly. March. He said it like he was searching his memory, trying to reconstruct a timeline he'd never known existed. I was in Singapore for the merger. When I got back, you wouldn't return my calls. I couldn't. Not then. Not knowing what I knew, Raven had been watching our exchange with focused attention, but now she leaned forward slightly. Before this becomes about what happened 12 years ago, can we talk about what's happening now? Both Damon and I turned to her, this 11-year-old girl who somehow held more composure than either of her parents. I need to say something before this gets more complicated, she continued. I'm not here for money. I'm not here to disrupt your life or make demands. I applied for the scholarship because I earned it. My essay was selected before anyone connected it to you. I put your name on the application because it was true, and my mom taught me that truth matters, even when it's inconvenient. Raven, I started, but she held up her hand gently. I'm also not angry with you, she said, her eyes on Damon now. You didn't know I existed. That wasn't your choice. But now you do know, and what happens next? That is your choice. Damon leaned forward, his hands clasped on the table, looking up at our daughter, with an expression of wonder mixed with what might have been shame. What would you like to happen next? I'd like to know you, Raven said simply. Not your money or your connections or your company. Just you. The person who used to sit in libraries and read. The person who made my mom laugh in that photograph. The person you are when the cameras aren't watching. That person might disappoint you, Damon said quietly, his voice raw. I'm not very good at this. At personal relationships. At being present. I've spent so many years building things that I'm not sure I remember how to just be. Then maybe it's time to learn, Raven suggested. My mom says people can always choose to be different than they were yesterday. Damon looked at me then, really looked at me for the first time since we'd entered the room. His eyes were wet, but he didn't try to hide the tears. You raised an extraordinary young woman. We raised her, I corrected, the pronoun feeling strange but necessary. You just didn't know you were contributing. Every scholarship I funded, every library I built. His voice broke. God, Amani, was I trying to find you? Find something I didn't even know I'd lost? The raw honesty in his voice nearly undid me. This wasn't the polished CEO who gave keynote speeches. This was the man who'd brought me tea on fire escapes, who'd sat on library floors, reading to children, who'd once said loving me was the only time he felt real. We need to establish boundaries, I said, forcing practicality into a moment threatening to overflow with emotion. If you want to be in Raven's life, and that's her choice as much as yours, then we do this at her pace. No lawyers drawing up custody arrangements, no media announcements, no machinery of your corporate world consuming this. Mom, Raven interjected gently. I can speak for myself. She turned to Damon. I want to get to know you gradually. Maybe start with something simple, like meeting once a week, somewhere normal, not fancy. And I want to keep living with Mom, going to my regular school, and maintaining my regular life. I don't want to become a different person just because I have a father now. She stays in the center, Damon said, understanding immediately. Not the money, not the company, not what anyone else wants or expects. Just Raven, making choices about what Raven needs. Exactly, I said, surprised by how quickly he grasped what mattered. Can I? He paused, uncertain in a way I'd never seen during our relationship. Would it be okay if I hugged you? Both of you. Raven looked at me, and I nodded. She stood first, walking around the table with measured steps. Damon rose to meet her, and I watched him carefully, tentatively wrap his arms around his daughter for the first time. He held her like she was made of spun glass, like she might disappear if he squeezed too tight. When he looked at me over her head, tears were streaming freely down his face. 11 years, he whispered. I missed 11 years. You can't get them back, I said, my own voice thick. But you haven't missed everything. She's only 11. There's still time for driving lessons, high school graduation, college tours. There's still time to be her father if that's what you want. Raven pulled back slightly. Am I still getting the scholarship? I really did earn it. Damon laughed through his tears, the sound breaking and reforming into something like joy. Of course you're getting the scholarship. Your essay was brilliant. The selection committee chose it unanimously before anyone made the connection. Although, he added with a slight smile, we might need to figure out how to handle the public announcement, given the circumstances. Anonymous could work, Raven suggested, her strategic mind already solving problems. Just say a New York City student. That way it's about work, not the family drama. You really did get the best of both of us, Damon said, wondering about coloring his voice. Your mother's integrity and practical wisdom, and apparently my strategic thinking, though you wield it with far more grace than I ever managed. The afternoon sun had shifted, casting long shadows across the conference room. What had started as a simple scholarship meeting had become a reckoning, a reconciliation, a careful first step towards something none of us could fully envision yet. I should probably get back to Brooklyn, I said, recognizing we'd reached the limit of what any of us could process in one sitting. Raven has a robotics club at 4. Robotics? Damon's interest sharpened immediately. What are you building? A water filtration system using algorithms to predict maintenance needs, Raven explained, falling naturally into describing her work. It's for communities that can't afford regular infrastructure updates. The system learns from usage patterns and flags components before they fail completely. She's trying to solve the world one invention at a time, I added, pride evident in my voice despite the emotional exhaustion settling into my bones. Like mother, like daughter, Damon said softly. Then, more formally, would next Saturday work for that meeting? Somewhere in Brooklyn. Your choice of place. Raven looked at me, and I nodded. There's a diner on Fulton Street that makes excellent pancakes, she offered. Nothing fancy, but the food is good and they don't rush you. Pancakes it is, Damon agreed. He stood, then seemed unsure what to do next, this man who commanded boardrooms, now awkward about basic social protocols with his own daughter. Do we exchange numbers? How does this work? I pulled out my phone. I'll text you the details. My number hasn't changed. He absorbed that information, that for 11 years I'd had the same number he'd once called regularly, the number that had gone to voicemail when he'd returned from Singapore, the line he could have reached me on at any point if only he'd known to try. As we gathered our things to leave, Damon said, Amani, wait, please. Can we talk for just a moment, alone? Raven looked between us, then nodded with maturity beyond her years. I'll wait by the elevators. Take your time. When she left, the room felt both larger and smaller. Damon and I stood facing each other, 11 years of silence stretching between us like a chasm that might be too wide to cross. I need to apologize, he began. For what? You didn't know. Not for that. For before. For choosing the expansion over us. For letting the work get so loud I couldn't hear what mattered. You tried to tell me that last night in the park. You said I was losing myself, and you were right. We were in different places, I said carefully. You had an empire to build, and you had a daughter to raise, alone, because you didn't trust me to choose her over the empire. He ran his hand through his hair, a gesture I remembered from moments of stress. You were right not to trust me. Not then. I wouldn't have been a good father at 23, consumed by ambition and proving myself. And now I've built everything I thought I wanted and realized none of it means anything compared to what I missed. He looked toward the door where Raven had exited. She's remarkable, Amani. That essay about broken streetlights, she sees the world as a system that can be improved with enough thought and care. That's you. That's all you. It's you too, I admitted. Systematic thinking, the ability to see patterns and scale solutions. She got your brain and somehow figured out how to pair it with a heart that stays open. Will you ever forgive me? He asked. For being someone you couldn't trust with this? There's nothing to forgive. We were who we were, The question is who we choose to be now, who we choose to become for her sake. I want to be her father, he said without hesitation, not just biologically, but really present. Show up for robotics competitions and help with homework, and learn what she likes on her pancakes. Maple syrup and strawberries, I supplied automatically. Never blueberries, she's allergic. Allergic to blueberries, he repeated, and I could see him cataloguing the information like crucial data. What else? What do I need to know? You'll learn, I assured him. She's patient with people who are genuinely trying. Just show up consistently. That's what matters most. We walked toward the elevator together, the weight of shared history and uncertain future, making each step feel significant. At the elevator bank, Raven was waiting, reading something on her phone with the focused intensity she brought to everything. Ready? I asked her. Almost, she said, then looked up at Damon. I just want you to know, I'm glad the secret's out. Not just for me, but for Mom too. She's been carrying this alone for too long. The elevator arrived, and as we stepped in, Damon said, Saturday then. Pancakes and conversation, and probably 1,000 questions, Raven warned with a slight smile. I've had 11 years to think of them. I'll try to have answers, he promised, though I can't promise they'll all be good ones. As the elevator descended, I caught our reflection in the polished steel doors. 3 people connected by biology and secrets and truth, finally spoken. We emerged onto Manhattan Street, where life continued its normal pace, unaware that inside that glass tower, 3 lives had just changed direction entirely. Walking to the subway, Raven slipped her hand into mine. That went better than I expected. What did you expect? Honestly, I thought he might deny it, or get angry, or call lawyers. She paused. I didn't expect him to cry. Those were good tears, I said. The kind that means something broke open that needed to. Do you think he'll really show up on Saturday? Yes, I said with more certainty than I felt. I think he will. And he did. If this story has you feeling something, hit like and share it with one person who needs courage today. And tell me in the comments, what boundaries protect love in your life? How do you create space for truth while maintaining safety? The pancake lunches had been going well for 3 weeks when everything changed. Damon had shown up every Saturday at the Fulton Street diner, arriving in jeans instead of suits, ordering coffee instead of whatever his assistant usually brought him, and listening to Raven explain everything from her robotics project to her. Theories about why certain problem-solving approaches worked better than others. He was learning. Slowly, carefully, he was figuring out how to be present without overwhelming. How to show interest without trying to fix everything with money. Then someone took a photograph. It was a Thursday afternoon, when my phone started buzzing with unusual intensity. Text messages from colleagues, former classmates I hadn't spoken to in years, even my building superintendent, all sharing the same link to a gossip site I'd never heard of. Billionaire Damon Blackwell, spotted with mystery woman and child, new family or philanthropic scouting. The photo was grainy but unmistakable. Damon, Raven, and me, leaving the diner last Saturday, captured mid-laugh about something Raven had said. In the image, Damon's hand rested lightly on Raven's shoulder in a gesture that was becoming natural between them. The article speculated wildly: secret relationship, hidden family, talent scouting for the foundation, mentorship program expansion. My hands shook as I scrolled through the comments. Most were benign curiosity, but some cut deeper. Gold digger found her mark. Convenient timing with that scholarship announcement. Poor guy probably doesn't know she's just after his money. I was still processing when my phone rang. Damon's name on the screen. You've seen it, he said without preamble. Just now. Damon, I'm so sorry. I should have been more careful. We should have... This isn't your fault. It's the world I live in. Either way, it's my problem to solve. He paused, and I heard voices in the background, sharp and urgent. My communications team wants to meet. Today. They're calling it damage control. The phrase made my stomach turn. Damage control. Like truth was a spill to mop up. a crisis to manage rather than a reality to navigate. "I need to pick up Raven from school in an hour," I said, checking my watch. "Can we talk after? Come to the foundation. 6 o'clock. We'll figure this out together." When I picked up Raven, she was already on her phone, her expression more curious than concerned. "Mom, there's a picture of us online. Some of my friends sent it to me." "I know, sweetheart. How are you feeling about it?" She considered the question with her usual thoughtfulness. Weird, but also kind of relieved, like, "I was wondering how long we could keep meeting in public before someone noticed. Did you really think a billionaire could eat pancakes in Brooklyn without eventually being recognized?" Her pragmatism steadied me. "I guess I hoped for a little more time before the world got involved." "The world's always involved, Mom. We just get to decide how we respond to it." At 6 o'clock, we entered the Blackwell Foundation conference room to find not just Damon but 3 other people. His communications director, his legal counsel, and someone whose title I missed in my rising anxiety. The energy in the room was different from our previous visit, tighter, more controlled, more like the machinery I'd feared all those years ago. "Thank you for coming," Damon said, his voice more formal than it had been at the diner. "This is Victoria Lang, my communications director, and James Reeves, general counsel. They've prepared some options for how we handle the current situation." Victoria, a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and sharper suit, opened a presentation on the large screen. The photograph has been shared across multiple platforms. Current reach is approximately 2 million impressions and climbing. "We have 3 potential strategies." She clicked to the first slide, Strategy 1, Denial and Distance. "Issue a statement that Ms. Graves and her daughter are scholarship recipients, nothing more. Cease public contact for 6 months. Let the story die from lack of attention." My chest tightened. Raven's hand found mine under the table. "Strategy 2, Controlled Disclosure," Victoria continued. "Confirm biological relationship, but frame as recent discovery. Emphasize Mr. Blackwell's commitment to supporting newly discovered families while maintaining appropriate boundaries. Keep details minimal." Strategy 3, Full Narrative Control. Craft comprehensive story for exclusive interview with approved journalist. Shape the message before others shape it for us, positioned as a heartwarming reunion rather than scandal. The room fell silent. Everyone looked at Damon, waiting for him to choose which version of truth would serve his interests best. But Damon was looking at Raven. "What do you think?" he asked her. The adults in the room shifted uncomfortably, clearly not expecting an 11-year-old to be consulted on crisis management strategy. Raven studied the slides, then said, "I think all 3 of these are about protecting the wrong thing. They're about protecting image instead of truth. They're about managing perception instead of being honest." "Raven," James the lawyer began, "you have to understand that public perception affects very real things, stock prices, foundation funding, Mr. Blackwell's ability to—" "I understand," Raven interrupted politely but firmly. "But what I don't understand is why we're treating the truth like it's shameful. My mom made a choice 11 years ago that she thought was best for me. My father didn't know I existed. Now he does, and he's trying to be part of my life. That's not a scandal. That's just what happened." Victoria leaned forward. "The public won't necessarily see it that way. There will be questions about why your mother didn't tell him, speculation about motives." "Let them speculate," Raven said. "People are going to make up stories no matter what we do. At least if we tell the truth, we know what we're standing on." I found my voice. "Raven, honey, you need to understand what this could mean. People might say cruel things about you, about me. Your classmates might treat you differently. There might be photographers at your school." "Will there be?" She looked at Victoria. "Possibly," Victoria admitted. "For a few weeks at least, until the next story breaks. Then we deal with it," Raven said simply. "Together. But we don't lie about who we are just because the truth is complicated." Damon stood, walking to the window, his back to the room. When he turned, his expression had shifted from CEO to father. "Victoria, James, thank you for the strategies. But we're going to do something different." "Mr. Blackwell," James started, "we're going to tell the truth." Damon said firmly. Not through an exclusive interview or a carefully crafted statement. We're going to live it honestly and let people think whatever they want. That's not a strategy, Victoria objected. That's hoping for the best while preparing for nothing. Then help me prepare, Damon countered. Not to spin the story, but to protect Raven from the fallout. Security if she needs it, support, whatever makes this transition easier for her. There's actually a fourth option, Raven said, and everyone turned to her. The scholarship showcase is in 3 weeks. All the winners give speeches about their projects. What if I just told the truth then, in my own words, in my own way? Absolutely not, Victoria said immediately. That's inviting media scrutiny at a vulnerable moment. Or, Raven countered, I'd be taking control of my own narrative. Isn't that what you said? Control the message before others do? Well, who better to control my message than me? I looked at my daughter, this 11-year-old who'd somehow figured out what rooms full of adults were missing. What would you say? The truth, that I applied for the scholarship because I earned it, that I listed my father's name because it was honest. That family is complicated and that's okay. Those secrets don't protect people, they just postpone the truth. You're 11, James said, not unkindly. That's tremendous pressure to put on yourself. I'm 11 and I've been living with this secret my whole life, Raven replied. Telling the truth can't be harder than keeping quiet, has been. Damon returned to the table, sitting directly across from Raven. If we do this, if we let you speak at the showcase, there's no taking it back. Once you say it, the world knows. People will have opinions about our family who've never met us. Are you sure you want that? No, Raven said honestly. But I want to live honestly more than I want to hide comfortably. The room sat in heavy silence. Finally, Victoria sighed. If we're doing this, we need preparation, media training, counseling to help her process potential reactions, security assessment for her school, and we help craft her speech, not to change her message, but to help her deliver it clearly. We also need to talk to the school, I added. Give them advance notice so they can manage any attention. And we need family counseling, Damon said. All 3 of us. Because whatever happens after she speaks, we need to be solid. United, Raven nodded. When do we start? What's your move? Keep it private or tell your truth on your terms. Drop team private or team public your way in the comments, because what Raven was about to do would change not just our family, but how we thought about courage itself. The Blackwell Foundation's atrium had been transformed into a celebration of young brilliance. Sunlight poured through the 3-story windows, illuminating display tables, where scholarship winners had arranged their projects like precious offerings. A girl from the Bronx had created a hydroponic system using recycled materials. Twin brothers from Queens had designed an app connecting elderly residents with teenage tech tutors. A boy from Staten Island had built a prototype for affordable hearing aids using accessible components. Raven's display featured her streetlight mapping project, charts showing correlations between darkness and safety concerns, her app mock-up, and the essay that had started everything. Parents and donors circulated through the space, asking questions, taking photos, celebrating. Achievement that had emerged from circumstances designed to limit rather than launch. But the real event would happen at 2 o'clock, when each of the 5 winners would give a 10-minute presentation about their work and their vision for the future. Raven would speak last, a position she'd requested specifically. I need to see how the room feels first, she'd explained to Victoria during preparation. Need to understand the audience before I ask them to understand me. Now, standing in the Foundation's green room an hour before showtime, my daughter looked smaller than usual, despite the navy dress we'd chosen together, simple, professional, with pockets deep enough to hold her note cards and her courage. She'd pulled her hair back with that purple ribbon, the same one she wore for every important moment. Her fingers drummed against her thigh in that pattern I'd come to recognize, as Damon's genetic inheritance asserting itself through nerves. Your breathing is shallow, Damon observed, looking up from his own phone where he'd been obsessively checking the atrium setup. He'd been trying to hide his own anxiety, but his tells were obvious to anyone paying attention. The jaw tension. The way he kept adjusting his tie, the fact that he'd checked his watch 9 times in 5 minutes. "Of course, my breathing is shallow," Raven replied. "I'm about to tell 200 people that the billionaire funding this event is my father, who didn't know I existed until 3 months ago. That's not exactly a recipe for respiratory calm." "You don't have to do this," I said, for what felt like the 100th time, sitting beside her on the leather sofa. "We can tell Victoria you've changed your mind. Give a speech just about your project. No one would blame you." "I would blame me," Raven said quietly. "I'd know I chose fear over truth, and that's not who I want to be." The door opened and Victoria entered, followed by Dr. Morrison, the family therapist we'd been seeing twice weekly for the past 3 weeks. We'd asked her to be present today for support, and her calm presence had already helped us through 2 near-panic moments that morning. 15 minutes until the first speaker, Victoria announced. Her usual briskness softened slightly by what might have been concern. "Raven, how are you feeling?" Like I might throw up, but in a purposeful way, Raven answered honestly. Dr. Morrison smiled, settling into a chair across from us. "That's your body preparing for something significant. The same chemicals that create fear also create courage. The only difference is what you do with them. Feel the fear, acknowledge it, but don't let it choose your actions." "Easier said than done," Raven muttered. "True courage isn't the absence of fear," Dr. Morrison continued. "It's deciding that something matters more than your fear." "Does this matter more than being comfortable?" Raven looked at Damon, then at me, then down at her note cards covered in her precise handwriting. "Yes. It matters because living honestly matters. It matters because other kids with complicated families need to see that you can tell the truth and survive. It matters because my mom has been carrying this secret alone for too long, and my dad has been missing pieces of his life he didn't even know were gone." "Then you already have your answer," Dr. Morrison said gently. Through the green room's window, we could see the atrium filled with people. Foundation board members in expensive suits, teachers who championed their students, parents holding phones ready to capture their children's moment of recognition, journalists from education publications, and others, people I didn't recognize, who might be donors or might be reporters who'd heard whispers about today's event being more than a standard scholarship celebration. "There are more people than we expected," Victoria noted, scrolling through her tablet. "Word seems to have spread. I'm seeing credentials from several major outlets." "Major outlets?" I felt my protective instincts surge. "We specifically said this was primarily for the education press. News has a way of finding its own audience," Victoria said diplomatically. "But security is thorough. Everyone here has proper credentials and went through appropriate channels." Damon stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the polished floor. "This was a mistake. I won't let my daughter be fed to media speculation for entertainment. We're cancelling her personal disclosure." "Dad," Raven said, and the words still stopped him every time she used it without hesitation. "I appreciate you wanting to protect me, but you can't protect me from everything. And honestly, I don't want you to. I want you to trust me to do this." "You're 11 years old," Damon said, his voice rough with emotion. "You shouldn't have to be this brave." "Maybe not, but I am anyway." "Where do you think I got that from?" She looked between us. "Mom raised me alone while building a career and never once complained about how hard it was. You built an empire from scratch because you weren't afraid to try something everyone said was impossible. I have both of your determination and both of your courage. Trust it. Trust me." I watched Damon struggle with competing instincts, the executive who'd spent decades controlling narratives, and the father who was learning that love sometimes meant stepping back instead of solving. "Okay," he said finally, sitting back down. "Okay, but I'm right there in the front row. If anything feels wrong, if you want to stop, just look at me and I'll end it." "How would you end it?" Raven asked, genuinely curious despite the tension. "I have no idea," Damon admitted. "Fire alarm? Sudden medical emergency? I haven't planned that far ahead because I'm really hoping you won't need me to." "Despite everything," Raven smiled. "You're kind of a mess about this." Completely, he agreed. Turns out, I'm much better at billion-dollar negotiations than watching my daughter walk into potential judgment. Victoria's phone buzzed. 5 minutes. The first speaker is heading to the stage. Raven, you'll watch from the wings so you can get a feel for the audience, then wait in position for your introduction. We stood together. This unlikely family unit assembled from silence and secrets and second chances. I reached for Raven's hand and found it trembling slightly. Damon put his hand on her shoulder, the gesture that had become natural between them over 3 weeks of Saturday pancakes and halting conversations about everything and nothing. Remember your breathing technique, Dr. Morrison coached. 4 counts in, hold for 4, 4 counts out. Your body knows how to be calm even when your mind is racing. Raven closed her eyes, practicing what we'd rehearsed dozens of times. 4 counts in, her chest rose. Hold. Her shoulders settled. 4 counts out. Her hand steadied in mine. Better, she said, opening her eyes with renewed focus. We walked together to the backstage area, where the first speaker, the girl with the hydroponic system, was being prepared. She caught sight of Raven and grinned. Nervous? Completely, Raven admitted. Good, means you care. My grandmother says if you're not nervous, you're not paying attention to what matters. The girl took the stage to enthusiastic applause, launching into her presentation about urban farming and food deserts with confidence that made it look easy. But I could see the note card trembling in her hand, the slight hesitation when she transitioned between topics. Bravery, I realized, didn't mean not being scared. It meant being scared and speaking anyway. Raven watched intently, studying not just what the girl said, but how the audience responded. When they leaned forward with interest, when they smiled, when they applauded. She was cataloging data, reading the room like a complex system to understand. The second speaker followed, one of the twins, talking about bridging generational digital divides with humor and heart. Then the third, the boy with the hearing aid prototype, who got emotional, talking about his younger sister and had to pause to collect himself. The audience waited patiently, supportively, and when he continued, they listened with even more attention. They're kind, Raven observed quietly. The audience. They want us to succeed. Most people do, Dr. Morrison said from her position beside us in the wings. We expect judgment because we've internalized criticism, but most people are rooting for courage when they see it. The fourth speaker finished to standing applause. Victoria appeared at Raven's elbow. You're up. Remember, you can read from your cards, you can improvise, you can do whatever feels right in the moment. There's no wrong way to tell your truth. Raven pulled her note cards from her pocket, glanced at the first one, then tucked them all away again. Actually, I think I need to do this without them. The words are in my head. The cards are just insurance against fear, and I don't want to insure against this. Are you sure? I asked, my own anxiety spiking. No, she said honestly, but I'm doing it anyway. The MC's voice rang out over the sound system. Our final speaker needs no long introduction. Her essay on infrastructure, community, and systemic solutions moved our selection committee to a unanimous decision. Please welcome Raven Graves. The applause swelled as Raven stepped into the light. I moved to the wing's edge where I could see both her and the audience. Damon was exactly where he'd promised, front row center, his hands gripped. Together so tightly, his knuckles showed white even from this distance. Raven walked to the microphone with steady steps, her purple ribbon catching the afternoon light streaming through the windows. She adjusted the mic stand to her height, a small practical moment that somehow made everything feel more real, more human. Then she looked out at 200 faces waiting to hear about streetlights and solutions. Thank you, she began, her voice clear despite the nervousness I knew she felt. I'm Raven Graves. I'm 11 years old, and before I talk about broken streetlights, I need to talk about broken silences. The room shifted, attention sharpening. I saw journalists lean forward, recording devices ready. I saw Damon's expression transform from anxiety to something like awe. I saw my daughter standing in her truth, about to speak words that would change everything. My project maps darkness in forgotten neighborhoods, she continued, her voice growing stronger. But first, I want to talk about another kind of darkness, the kind that lives in secrets kept for protection. Because 3 months ago, I did something that changed my life and my family. I applied for this scholarship, and in the application, I listed my father's name for the first time ever. I wrote, "Father, Damon Blackwell." The room went completely still. You could have heard a heartbeat, a breath, a world reorganizing itself around new information. "He didn't know I existed," Raven said simply, clearly. "Not because he didn't want me, but because my mother made a choice when she was young and scared that keeping me secret was the same as keeping me safe. And maybe she was right then. Maybe that was the brave choice at that moment. But secrets have expiration dates, and ours have come due." I watched tears stream down my face, watched Damon's hands unclench as he leaned forward. Watched 200 people witness a child being brave enough to rewrite her own story in real time. If this is speaking to you, save this video for later, and subscribe to Mr. Steele Rich Stories. We tell powerful, true-to-life narratives every week, stories about courage, family, and what happens when truth finally demands its moment. Raven continued speaking, her voice steady, her message clear, and I realized that somewhere between the fear and the courage, between the past and the future, my daughter had figured out what I'd spent 11 years learning, that truth doesn't destroy what's real. It only destroys what was never solid to begin with. Raven let the weight of her revelation settle over the room for 3 measured breaths. I could see her counting them, using Dr. Morrison's technique to stay centered while 200 people processed what she'd just said. Then, with the same calm precision she brought to solving impossible problems, she continued. "But this presentation isn't about my family history," she said, her voice gaining strength. "It's about how we fix things that are broken. So let me tell you about streetlights." The transition was so smooth, so deliberate, that it took the audience a moment to follow. She'd acknowledged the revelation and then firmly directed attention back to what actually mattered: her work, her vision, her solution to a problem everyone had accepted as unsolvable. She gestured to the screen behind her where her first slide appeared, a map overlaid with dark patches where streetlights had been reported broken for more than 6 months. "This is my neighborhood. Every black dot represents a light that's been out long enough for people to stop reporting it. We've learned that darkness is just how things are." Click. The next slide showed safety statistics correlated with those dark patches. But darkness isn't neutral. It's a choice we make, not individually, but systemically. When we let lights stay broken, we're choosing to let some neighborhoods exist in shadow, while others stay illuminated. She walked them through her research with the clarity of someone who'd lived inside this problem for years. How she'd noticed patterns, discovered that individual reports got lost in bureaucratic systems designed for different eras, how repair crews responded to single addresses rather than geographic clusters. "The city doesn't ignore these reports on purpose," Raven explained. "They just have an inefficient system. Repair crews traveling to individual addresses means sending trucks out for single lights. It's expensive, time-consuming, and easy to deprioritize when budgets tighten." Click. Her app interface appeared, clean, intuitive, brilliant in its simplicity. "My solution bundles reports by geographic proximity. Instead of fixing one light at a time, repair crews get optimized routes, handling multiple lights in the same area. What used to take 5 separate trips now takes 1. She demonstrated the app's features: crowdsourced reporting, real-time mapping, automated bundling algorithms, predictive maintenance based on usage patterns. I tested a prototype in 3 Brooklyn neighborhoods over 6 months. Average repair time dropped from 47 days to 11. A hand shot up from the audience. A city official I vaguely recognized. "Did you coordinate with the Department of Transportation?" "I tried," Raven said honestly. "They said they'd review my proposal and get back to me. That was 4 months ago." Which taught me something important. Sometimes you can't wait for systems to fix themselves. You have to build new systems that work so obviously better that the old ones become embarrassing to maintain. Appreciative laughter rippled through the crowd. Even the journalists were taking notes about the actual project now. the family revelation temporarily secondary to innovation. Broken lights are just one example, Raven continued, her confidence building with each word. The same bundling principle works for infrastructure maintenance, resource distribution. Any service that's currently handled reactively instead of systematically. We accept inefficiency because we've forgotten that cities are just complex problems waiting for better solutions. She was in her element now, passion overriding nervousness. This was who Raven truly was, not defined by her father's wealth or her mother's choices, but by her own fierce determination to fix what others accepted as broken. Which brings me back to truth, she said, and the room stilled again. I put my father's name on my application because it was honest. He's Damon Blackwell. He didn't know about me before that application. He knows now. And we're figuring it out the way good people figure out complicated things, with honesty, patience, and the belief that broken connections can be repaired if you're willing to do the work. She looked directly at Damon then, and I saw his composure finally break completely. Tears tracked down his face openly, unapologetically, visible to everyone in the room. My mom taught me that secrets don't protect people, they just postpone truth, Raven said, her eyes finding mine in the wings for a brief moment. My dad is teaching me that it's never too late to show up for what matters. And both of them are showing me that family isn't about perfection. It's about being brave enough to be honest and kind enough to forgive. The silence that followed was different from before, not shocked, but reverent. Even the journalists had lowered their devices, simply listening to an 11-year-old girl redefine courage in real time. Then Damon stood. He didn't ask permission, didn't check with Victoria or his legal team. He simply walked to the stage, and the audience parted instinctively to let him through, understanding somehow that this moment belonged to them. Raven watched him approach, uncertainty flickering across her face for the first time. When he reached her, he knelt so they were eye level, and spoke into the microphone she still held. "I see you," he said, his voice breaking on the words, but carrying clearly through the room. "I see your brilliance, your courage, your heart that's better than mine ever was. And I'm so proud of you, not because you're exceptionally smart or because you built something innovative, though you are, and you did. I'm proud because you chose the truth when lying would have been easier. You chose vulnerability when protection was available. You chose to trust that people are fundamentally good, even when you had reasons to doubt." He paused, struggling for composure, while 200 people watched. "I missed the first 11 years of your life. That's time I can never get back, mistakes I can never undo. But I'm here now, and I'm not going anywhere. Whatever comes from today, whatever the headlines say, whatever people speculate, I want you to know that being your father is the greatest honor of my life." Raven set down the microphone carefully, then stepped into his arms. The hug was captured by a dozen cameras, but somehow it felt private anyway. A moment of genuine emotion that transcended the performance of public life. When they separated, Raven picked up the mic again, her composure remarkable. "Questions? About the streetlight project, I mean. We can save family questions for therapy." The room erupted in laughter. Warm, supportive, released tension transforming into appreciation. The panel of judges, who'd been silent throughout the personal revelation, seemed to remember their function. The older woman in the center, a retired professor of urban planning, cleared her throat. "Your bundling algorithm," she began, returning focus to the work. "Have you considered scaling it beyond municipal services? The principle could apply to healthcare accessibility, educational resource distribution." "Yes," Raven said eagerly, back in her element. "Actually, I have notebooks full of applications. If you bundle community health appointments by geography, you reduce transportation barriers. If you bundle tutoring requests by subject and location, you create study groups instead of isolated sessions. The core insight is that efficiency and community aren't opposing values, they're complementary." They discussed technical details for several minutes, Raven fielding questions with expertise that made her age irrelevant. The journalists were still taking notes, but now they were writing about innovation rather than scandal. Finally, the panel chair stood, We'd like to announce our grand prize winner, the recipient of the full scholarship, package including graduate school funding, mentorship, and program support. The room waited. The other 4 finalists sat together, holding hands with their families. This year, the selection was unanimous before we knew about any personal connections. The chair continued. The essay spoke for itself. The prototype worked. The vision was both practical and transformative. Our grand prize goes to Raven Graves. The applause was thunderous, genuine. Raven walked to accept the award, a crystal recognition piece and a folder outlining the scholarship terms, and shook hands with each panel member with grace and gratitude. The older panelist who'd asked about scaling spoke again as Raven returned to the microphone, her voice warm and carrying a smile. Your app is efficient, young lady. Turns out your approach to family is too. You've taken a complicated situation and bundled it into something that works. That's the mark of a truly brilliant problem solver. Scattered laughter, but also appreciation for the elegant observation. As Raven left the stage, the formal program concluded, and the room erupted into conversation. I rushed from the wings to meet her, Damon arriving at the same moment from the opposite direction. We collided in an embrace of relief and pride, so overwhelming it felt like drowning in joy. You did it, I whispered into her hair. You were extraordinary. We did it, she corrected, her voice muffled against my shoulder. All 3 of us. We chose the truth together. Damon wiped his eyes without any self-consciousness. That was the bravest thing I've ever witnessed. Really? Raven looked skeptical. You've negotiated billion-dollar deals. Those were just numbers, he said. This was your heart. There's no comparison. 6 months after the showcase, our lives had settled into a rhythm that felt nothing like the spectacle I'd once feared, and everything like the family we were slowly becoming. It was a Thursday evening, our new standing dinner night, and Damon was learning to navigate the subway route to our apartment instead of sending his driver. He'd texted me a photo of himself on the platform with the caption, "Public transportation is humbling." Also, someone just asked me for directions, and I actually knew the answer. I smiled at my phone while finishing the braids I was weaving into Raven's hair, a ritual we'd maintained since she was 3. She sat on the floor between my knees, working through advanced calculus problems that her regular math teacher had stopped assigning her, having accepted that Raven had already taught herself beyond the curriculum. Dad's running late, she observed, without looking up from her notebook. He texted, "Train delays. He should account for variables and leave earlier." But she was smiling as she said it, that fond exasperation reserved for people you love despite their imperfections. The doorbell rang 17 minutes later. We'd started noting Damon's arrival times because Raven had created a statistical model of public transit reliability and needed data points. He entered carrying grocery bags and looking slightly disheveled in, a way that would have shocked his board members and delighted me. The train stopped between stations for 15 minutes, he announced. No explanation given. I walked the last few blocks. Also, I think I'm developing strong opinions about infrastructure investment. "Welcome to how most people live," I said, accepting the bags. "What's all this?" "Ingredients." Raven sent me a recipe last week and I thought we could cook together. He looked almost uncertain about it. This man who commanded boardrooms. "If that's okay. I know Thursday is usually your cooking night, but I wanted to try making something." "You want to cook?" Raven looked up, genuinely surprised. "I want to learn things that matter," he corrected. "Like how to make food my daughter enjoys, and how to be useful in a kitchen that doesn't come with professional staff." We cooked together in our tiny kitchen, 3 people navigating limited counter space. With the same problem-solving skills Raven applied to her engineering challenges. Damon was terrible at chopping vegetables, his pieces wildly inconsistent, but he followed Raven's patient instructions without ego. She'd inherited his quick learning curve. He was discovering he'd inherited nothing regarding culinary talent. "The key is uniform size," Raven explained for the 3rd time, demonstrating proper knife technique. "Otherwise they cook unevenly and the whole dish fails." "Your daughter speaks in systems analysis even while cooking," Damon observed to me. "Our daughter," I corrected gently. She's yours too now. You don't get to observe from outside anymore. He paused mid-chop, something vulnerable crossing his face. I'm still getting used to that. Having the right to claim her. You don't have to claim her, Raven said, not looking up from the pot she was stirring. You just have to show up. You've been doing that. After dinner, the stir-fry was decent despite Damon's chaotic vegetable pieces. We settled into our established routine. Raven had homework, which Damon helped with when it involved physics or economics, and wisely stayed quiet about when it required literary analysis. I worked on a grant proposal for expanded library programming. Damon responded to emails that couldn't wait, occasionally reading us, particularly absurd corporate jargon, and asking Raven to translate it into plain language, a game they'd developed that made him better at communicating and her better at understanding unnecessary complexity. Around 9, after Raven had gone to bed, Damon and I sat on the fire escape with tea. He'd started keeping a tin of the cinnamon blend at our apartment, a callback to nights that felt like both ancient history and yesterday simultaneously. I saw the feature in the Technology Journal, he said, about Raven's app being adopted by the city officially now. She's handling it well, staying focused on implementation, not the attention. She learned that from you, the ability to care more about impact than recognition. He was quiet for a moment. I've been thinking about something Dr. Morrison said in our last session. We'd continued family counseling even after the immediate crisis passed, learning that maintenance mattered as much as repair. Dr. Morrison had become expert at translating between my experiences and Damon's perspective, helping us understand that we could honor where we'd each come from while building something new together. Which thing? I asked. That forgiveness isn't an event, it's a practice. That we don't forgive once and move on. We forgive repeatedly in small moments as we keep choosing each other despite imperfection. Are you asking if I forgive you? I set down my tea, looking at him directly. For the choices you made 12 years ago that led to my choices, I'm asking if you're still forgiving me. Present tense. Ongoing. I considered this carefully, the way Raven approached complex problems. I forgive you for being young and ambitious, and not knowing what you wanted beyond success. I forgive you for building something that consumed your capacity for a relationship. I even forgive you for making me feel like I had to choose between protecting our daughter and trusting you with her existence. But, he heard the hesitation, but I'm also still learning to trust that you'll choose her when your work gets demanding again, because it will. There will be moments when the company needs everything and Raven needs you simultaneously. That's when the real test comes. I know. He reached for my hand, a gesture that had become natural again through months of careful rebuilding. I can't promise I'll be perfect, but I can promise I'll keep choosing her, keep choosing you, even when it's inconvenient, especially when it's hard. That's all anyone can promise, I said. Raven has this philosophy about debugging code. She says the goal isn't to write perfect programs, it's to build systems that fail gracefully and recover quickly. Maybe that's what family is too. Not perfection, but resilient imperfection. He smiled. Our daughter is going to change the world someday with philosophy like that. Our daughter, I echoed, and watched him absorb the pronoun like a gift he was still learning to accept. The following Saturday, Damon suggested a walk through the neighborhood. I want to see it through your eyes, he explained. Understand the foundation of the choices you made. We walked the route I'd traveled countless times, past the corner store, where the owner had extended credit when money was impossibly tight, past the community garden where Raven had learned about ecosystems, past the library branch where this whole story had begun. Damon noticed everything: the mural painted by local teenagers, the informal library someone maintained in a converted box, the way neighbors greeted each other by name. This is wealth, he said finally, stopping on a corner where one of Raven's mapped streetlights now shone brightly. Not the kind I've spent my life accumulating, but the kind that actually matters. Connection, community, people who know your daughter's name and ask about her projects. Money is a tool, I said. Community is a foundation. You can build temporary things with money alone, but anything lasting requires the other stuff, the Showing up, the being known, the letting people see you struggle and celebrating when you succeed. We stopped in front of the streetlight, and Damon looked up at it with something like reverence. She fixed this? She reported it through her app. The city bundled it with 6 others on this block. They were all repaired within 2 weeks. I touched the pole lightly. A neighbor thanked me at the store and said her daughter feels safer walking home from her evening shift now. That's the kind of change you can see and touch. That's what our daughter builds. Our daughter, he repeated. And I heard my own earlier lesson reflected back. We continued walking until we reached Prospect Park, the boathouse where we'd ended things 12 years ago looming ahead. Without discussing it, we both headed for the stone steps where we'd shared cinnamon tea and promises we'd been too young to keep. I was afraid to come back here, Damon admitted as we sat on the same steps. Thought it would hurt too much. Does it? No. It feels like returning to a place I'd forgotten existed, finding it still there. He turned to face me fully. Amani, I know we're taking things slowly. I know we're figuring out co-parenting before anything else. But I need you to know, what I felt for you 12 years ago, it didn't disappear. It went dormant, maybe, buried under all the noise I let drown it out. But it's still here. You're still the only person who makes me want to be quieter, smaller, more human. My breath caught. Damon, I'm not asking for anything, he said quickly. Not asking you to make decisions or promises. Just wanted you to know that when you're ready, if you're ever ready, I'm here. I'm not the same man who chose wrong 12 years ago. Or maybe I am. But I'm trying every day to be someone worthy of the family you built without me. I looked at this man who'd learned to ride subways and chop vegetables, poorly, and show up consistently despite having no model for it, who'd sat through family counseling without defensiveness, who'd listened to our daughter explain algorithms with genuine interest, who'd slowly, carefully earned his way into our lives through presence rather than presence. I learned something too, I said finally. I learned that safety without truth is just another kind of prison. I kept Raven safe by keeping you away, but I also kept us both locked in incomplete lives. We can honor that choice. It came from love, and still outgrow it. So, what does that mean? His voice was careful, hopeful. It means I'm ready to stop living in past fear and start living in the present possibility. It means I want to see who we become when we choose each other with full knowledge of our failures and our potential. I leaned forward and kissed him, there on the steps where we'd ended things, now beginning something new. It wasn't the desperate passion of people in their 20s convinced they'd discovered something no one else understood. It was the careful, deliberate intimacy of people who'd learned that love was a practice, not a feeling, something you built through showing up, telling the truth, and forgiving repeatedly. When we pulled apart, he was smiling. So, does this mean we're dating? Do adults our age still call it dating? I have no idea what we call it, I admitted, but Raven will probably create a framework and terminology guide if we don't figure it out soon. We sat together as the sun set over Brooklyn, and I thought about all the truths I'd learned through this journey. Truth number 1. Love without trust is just fear wearing a different name. I'd loved Raven enough to protect her, but not enough to trust that her father might surprise me. Truth number 2. Secrets don't protect people. They postpone the reckoning. Every day I kept silent was another day of incomplete truth, another brick in a wall that would eventually have to come down. Truth number 3. Children possess wisdom we often overlook. Raven navigated our family complexity with more grace than either parent, because she understood that complicated doesn't mean broken. Truth number 4. Wealth is measured in who shows up, not what shows up. Damon's money mattered less than his presence. His foundation mattered less than his willingness to sit on our apartment floor, helping Raven work through problems. Truth number 5. Forgiveness is maintenance work, not a single event. We didn't forgive once and move on. We forgave daily, in small moments, choosing grace over resentment. Truth number 6. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's deciding something matters more than your comfort. Raven taught us that by walking onto that stage and speaking truth, when silence would have been easier, And finally, truth number 7. The right name at the right moment doesn't just get attention. It calls us home. When Raven wrote Damon Blackwell in that application field, she didn't just claim her father. She called all 3 of us home to a truth we'd been avoiding, and that homecoming saved us. 3 weeks later, we returned to the Fort Greene Library for their Community Appreciation Night, the same branch where I'd discovered my pregnancy, where Raven had found that scholarship flyer, where our entire story had quietly developed in the margins of other people's narratives. Damon had donated funding for a new STEM center, but he'd insisted it be named the Community Innovation Hub, not after him or his foundation. Let it belong to the neighborhood, he'd said. Let it be theirs. We stood together at the opening, Amani, Damon, and Raven, cutting the ribbon while neighbors applauded and kids rushed past us toward the new equipment and resources. Margaret, the head librarian who'd handed me that fateful flyer, pulled me aside. "You did good, Amani," she said quietly. "Raised that brilliant girl, built this community, and figured out how to let love back in when you had every reason to keep it locked out. That's the real story here." I watched Raven show a group of younger kids how to use the design software, Damon standing back to observe. Rather than interfere, learning that support sometimes meant staying quiet and letting others shine. Yeah, I agreed. I think we did okay. If this story moved you, please hit that like button and share it with someone who needs courage today. Subscribe to Mr. Steele Rich Stories for more powerful, true-to-life narratives about family, forgiveness, and the complicated courage it takes to live honestly. Drop a comment telling us your biggest takeaway from this story and answer this question. What truth are you ready to speak with kindness? What secret are you carrying that might actually be lighter if you shared it with the right people? And thank you, truly, deeply thank you, for helping us cross 600 subscribers. We're building something special here, a community that believes in the power of stories to change how we see ourselves and each other. We're just getting started, and I can't wait to share more journeys with you. Remember, the truth doesn't always set you free immediately. Sometimes it just sets you on the path toward freedom, and you have to walk it one brave step at a time. But you don't have to walk it alone. Until next time, keep telling your truth, keep showing up for what matters, and keep believing that complicated families can become beautiful ones when everyone chooses courage over comfort. This is Mr. Steele Rich Stories, reminding you that the best stories aren't about perfect people making perfect choices. They're about real people choosing love, truth, and second chances, even when it's terrifying.